had a nice morning so far. I'm very pleased to welcome new members into our covenant, and we are honored by their commitment, and by that commitment also reminded that our hopeful promises that we make to each other are forever in process. We've had some good singing, and we've been touched by the joys and concerns of our community. And I want you to keep those things in a little thought web, and keep that thought web someplace safe for when you are feeling low or mean, for when you need it, because you may need it soon. There's a part of me that hates doing this. You all are generally making it work, getting by, mostly happy-ish most of the time. And you know, where it's not working, you're scrapping, trying to get it together. You've got your love and your heartbreak, and you probably don't want some self-appointed prophet to come along and point out the poison dripping through the tissue of the web of your life. On the other hand, this is what I'm called to do. Sometimes it is. The story I am in demands this of me, and in some respects, I believe you demand it of me as well. So, the title of today's sermon is Outrage. I will begin by referencing Chris Hedges, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and a Unitarian Universalist seminarian, though not a minister. He does hold a doctorate from Stark King, which is one of our seminaries. And in a recent article, he observes that, and I'll quote here, "We," which is the state and the people in this case, "have been, like nations on the periphery of empire, colonized. We are controlled by a tiny corporate entities that have no loyalty to the nation, and indeed, in the language of traditional patriotism, are traitors. They strip us of our resources, keep us politically passive, and enrich themselves at our expense." And so what Hedges and many others, from former Labor Secretary Robert Reich to Bill Moyers, to the people supporting the Occupy movement, what they have observed is that our democracy is being eroded by a plutocratic onslaught that, while both accidental and intentional, is entirely opposed to justice. So this word, plutocracy, plutocratic, what does it mean? Essentially, it means that power is concentrated in the hands of a small elite. It is rule by wealth rather than by law. It is nothing short of tyranny. Plutocracy, or another similar word, oligarchy, are awfully damn polite. Here's another word which is virtually synonymous with these delicate condemnations: fascism. Is that too much? And don't take my word for it. Listen to an expert in the field. Fascism, muses Benito Mussolini, should more appropriately be called corporatism, because it is a merger of state and corporate power. And thanks to Wayne for unearthing that quote on Facebook this week. So do we live in a corporatist, plutocratic, oligarchic, and fascist country? Would we know it if we did? This has been a slow, and I believe mostly unintentional, slide based primarily on the legacy of colonialism and expansionism that is part and parcel of our creation methods. Yet another dark side of manifest destiny. So corporatism. Consider this. In the 1970s, the top 1% brought in 8% of the total income. By 2010, that 1% brought in 23%. Consider that even as our economy expanded from 1980 to 2008, the average income for the bottom 90% of Americans increased just $303. It's over 28 years. Perhaps that is because during that same period of time, 80% of all new income created went to the top 1%. 80% of all new income for 30 years in a time of expansion went to 1% of our population. You can believe that the Democrats are not to blame. Of course, neither are the Republicans, because for this problem, those terms are infantile. This trend started with Reagan and accelerated during the Clinton presidency and became so bold under W. Bush and now Obama that they are rubbing our noses in it. It's not a red versus blue kind of thing, because red and blue are both the fronts through which this thing has been perpetrated. This is rather about the concentration of power and the corporations upon which the powerful suckle and within which they wield their wills. By the way, those institutions that embody the whims of the wealthy, corporations, have more rights than you do. Starting in the 1970s, the Supreme Court awarded corporations Fourth Amendment safeguards against warrantless regulatory searches, Fifth Amendment double jeopardy protection, and Sixth Amendment right to trial by jury. According to an article in the UU World last year, these acts blunted the impact of the Clean Air Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration Act, and the Consumer Product Safety Act, which are enacted to protect workers, consumers, and the environment. Of course, it got even worse recently as the Supreme Court overturned limitations on corporate spending in elections, citing freedom of speech. So now our country regards you, singular, you, and you, as the equal of an entity the size of Israel, with their squadrons of lawyers and treasury. In addition to the rights granted them by the Supreme Court, corporations also have limited liability, can live on indefinitely, and while their employees may be tried in criminal courts, corporations themselves cannot. So this is far from a domestic problem only. Political contributions don't even need to originate from U.S.-owned companies. Meanwhile, this past decade saw the continued deregulation of the financial sector. Subsequently, Wall Street collapsed. Our national economy took a nosedive, and thousands lost jobs, affecting millions. Our government bailed out Wall Street, but didn't and won't extend unemployment benefits. Maybe that's because Wall Street contributed $49 million to political campaigns this past election cycle. After we bailed them out, those CEOs today are now earning more money than they did before the bailout. On top of that, in 2011 alone, Wall Street spent $251 million fighting financial reform, protecting their assumption of resources and power. So at least we're making them work for it. Now, when talking about the concentration of power, money is one measure. But there is a more fundamental measure yet. Henry Kissinger once said something to the effect of, if you want to control a country, control their oil. If you want to control a people, control their food. Well, guess what? Our food has been concentrated into the hands of a few major agribusinesses, chief among which is the Goliath, Monsanto. Incidentally, most of these global agribusinesses were originally chemical companies. Cargill, Monsanto, Dow Corning. These are the people who brought us Agent Orange. They're now in charge of our food production. That is at least odd. So they moved into food production via chemical fertilizers and then genetically modified seed production. So this is not farming expertise. This is expertise in death and manipulation. Bon appetit. Now, like any company, Monsanto naturally yearns for monopoly. But Monsanto is a company that has been caught poisoning people in Alabama and bribing public health officials in Canada in order to endorse the questionable science behind their genetically modified foods. They've been caught doing this. And that is, of course, only where they've been caught. They put smaller farmers out of business. They do this by suing them when the small farm crops get contaminated by Monsanto's patented genetically modified seeds. They also effectively addict small farmers to Monsanto by contract as well as by the mechanics of GMO farming, genetically modified organism farming. So Monsanto contracts stipulate that you are not allowed to save seeds. And the biology of genetically modified seeds often ensure that this is impossible. They are some designed to die after a year. So once you start up with Monsanto, you've got to continue with Monsanto. Never before has a farmer sought to monopolize the seed supply. Monsanto also has a revolving door with our National Food Safety Bureaucracy, the FDA, Federal Food and Drug Administration. So just one example of this is one-time Monsanto lawyer, Michael Taylor, who in 1991, so he worked at Monsanto, and then in 1991, he became the Deputy Commissioner of Policy for the FDA, and then later became the Vice President for Public Policy at Monsanto. So that is literally a revolving door. The watchmen are watching the watchmen, right? Of course, Clarence Thomas was once a lawyer for Monsanto, not recusing himself from cases where they're involved, by the way. So Monsanto, U.S. government, same, different, and they yearn for a monopoly of our food supply. So we've got a radical concentration of money in the hands of the wealthy. A system wherein mega corporations act as disguises for the wealthy to contribute uncapped and anonymous money to policy-making puppets. We've got laws written and financed by private interests rather than elected lawmakers, as we have seen with the American Legislative Exchange Council's creation of Arizona's SB 1070. We've got revolving doors between regulators and the companies they regulate, and a middle class that is collapsing, forfeiting education, losing trust, losing jobs, and losing dignity. In short, we are a nation of economically broken people, a fearful majority that is taught to live as though it were denizens of a beaten, occupied country. And then we're pumped so full of fear and vitriol that we become proud of it. And this makes us complicit. Complicit in our nation's degeneration and the rise of corporatocracy, which may be the rise of fascism in our time. You are the colonized and the co-opted colonizers, bought off by 400 channels of a corrupted system. So I'll close this first homily where I started, thought from Chris Hedges. He writes that those who are economically broken usually cease to be concerned with civic virtues. They will, history has demonstrated, serve any system, no matter how evil, and do anything for a salary, job security, and the protection of their families. The reconfiguration of American society into a corporate oligarchy is conditioning tens of millions not only to passively accept state and corporate crimes, but to actively participate in the mechanisms that ensure their own enslavement. So, let us take refuge now for a moment. Find strength in our companionship. Let us regather our strength. And we will begin to do this corporate act of song. So please turn to page, or hymn number 95. And you may remain seated if you wish. I don't want to get too carried away. I've lived in places that were certainly authoritarian. And this doesn't feel like that. Of course, maybe I'm just on the right side. And just because it is not happening to me doesn't mean my neighbor is not beginning to feel the sting of plutocracy. And depending on how wide you cast your net of compassion and your sense of justice, you will undoubtedly be witness to the suffering of good people who want honest wages for honest work and a government that represents them. These people are on your block and in our town. Meanwhile, the concentration of power is not sustainable. It consumes the very structure upon which it rests, and the structure is teetering even now. As it does so, the elite begin to freak out and grab for more power to protect themselves. Now, the experience that Chris Hedges had as a reporter witnessing firsthand the death of autocracies has led him to understand that those within a demoralized ruling elite, like characters in a Chekhov play, increasingly understand that the system that enriches and empowers them is corrupt and decayed. They become cynical, they do not govern effectively, they retreat into hedonism, they no longer believe their own rhetoric. They devote their energies to stealing and exploiting as much, as fast as possible. That sounds familiar. In one example, close at hand, we see the generation of corporate prison systems and the laws designed to fill them, such as SB 1070. More broadly, we hear the vitriolic rhetoric escalate as the attempts to divide and conquer a la red versus blue become most effective and perhaps the only way to deflect attention from the actual circumstance. Hello, Wisconsin. It is also good to be aware that this is not the first time our country has been usurped by the plutocrats. In fact, the American Revolution was such a fight. Our forebears overthrew not only King George, but also the East India Company and their ilk. And meanwhile, of course, the framers were deeply suspicious of any concentration of power, including a corporate or private focus. And then there's Abraham Lincoln's prophecy of plutocracy at the end of the Civil War, which came to pass some decades on in what came to be known as the Gilded Age. It took a massive economic upheaval and the banding together of the common folk in order to restore the balance of power. But it was done. So knowing a little history and being aware of the present circumstance are both important and both help. After that, we have to look to ourselves. So there's an old story. It's about a person whose heart was breaking to bore witness to all the anguish and injustice and pain in the world on account of human activity. And this person stood before God and cried out, "Look at this evil and suffering. How can you just sit there? Why don't you send help?" And God replied. God said, "I did send help. I sent you. And here you sit. And not for nothing do you come here. But for what? God sent help. God sent you. So what will you do? What is your response? How is that response shaped by your religious faith and practice and promise? Conversation is crucial. It is also not enough. What will you do? I I will give you a couple of fundamental suggestions to get you started. And these are intended to be framing suggestions, and after that it is entirely up to you all. First, keep associating, by which I mean stick together. Be a body. Second, as I suggested some time ago, make a discipline of seeing the light in the eyes of those you meet. Find the bright spirit of dignity in the whites of the eyes of all those you come across as you engage them. And this includes those who you perceive as your enemy. And thirdly, lead with love. The armory of love is vast and powerful and accessible to all. One of the so-called weapons, or so to speak weapons I should say, in this arsenal is actually sitting in your lap or in the chair next to you. To paraphrase Woody Guthrie, this book kills fascists. Actually, that's not true. It kills fascism. And we will start by singing hymn 170. We are a gentle and angry people, and for this, if you would, as you are willing and able, please do rise. We'll extinguish the chalice now, will read our mission statement along with me as I do so. It's printed at the bottom of your order of service. This church
provides a safe place to celebrate diversity, draw inspiration for our lives, foster social and environmental justice, and compassionately support each other in our spiritual searches.
So there's a lot to do, and I think some of it has to be done in solitude as an individual, and some of it has to occur in a voluntary association such as a church. June 24th, 4,000 of our brothers and sisters will be here to help us consider how we move into the future. And it is absolutely pertinent to the subject of the sermon today. So, individually and as a group, what will you do?
If I could have your attention for just a couple more minutes. This morning we say goodbye to Whitney as she heads off into the sunrise. Well, home to Michigan and a new beginning. When is your wedding date?
January 4th, 2014.
January 4th, 2014.
I had enough money to move or get married. I had to wait.
We want to thank you for the many years of music you have brought us, whether accompanying our hymn singing or personal selections. Music infused with a sampling of contemporary and or soul artists, frequently inspiring an impromptu sing-along. This is how we'll remember you. We offer this small memento of West Valley so that perhaps from time to time you'll think of us, and we wish you the best of everything that makes life good.
Thank you all.
Okay,
She only gets one.
I've been told that you already got a
Rumor has it.
plan. Well, I wrote this little thing to go along with it, and I says, Dear Whitney, we know you are not a you, but who knows what's to be. Your musical talent is our loss. We will miss your bubbly personality. When you look at this chalice pin, remember your friends, whose best wish for you is stay true to yourself and think free. Okay, I have to remove this. Oh, Ann, you're something else today.
I have a lot of
And here's another card for all of us.
Thank you.
Here is this. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's been fun. You all are blessed.
You lost the backing for this pin that I had to remove.
Well, I think we don't need to wait for that.